He wasn't supposed to survive. A battle-worn Australian soldier, broken in body and betrayed by the only person he had left to trust. His wife had pushed him from a cliff, vanishing into the shadows of the Blue Mountains' gum-scented silence. And yet, he lived. Not because of luck, because of a dog, a German shepherd with scars deeper than skin. A ghost from the battlefield who refused to let his mate fall alone. They say loyalty has no language, but this one barked, fought, ran through rain, through lies, through every force trying to bury the truth. This isn't just a survival story. It's about the kind of love only God could have orchestrated. The kind that stares death in the eye and doesn't blink. Before we begin, where in the world are you reading from? And if you believe a dog's loyalty is nothing short of divine, drop an amen in the comments. This story will stay with you long after it ends. The morning air in the ranges outside Katoomba was thinner than usual, tinged with the scent of eucalyptus and the distant promise of rain. Wisps of mist still clung to the shadows of towering mountain ash, casting long, pale fingers across the winding gravel path that curled from the back veranda of the Lawson property to the lookout locals called Widow's Ledge. The sun, hesitant in its climb, bled gold along the ridgeline. Magpies dared to sing, but for Jack Lawson, the quiet was a lie. Jack, 33, sat motionless in his motorized wheelchair, bundled in a thick olive-green army jacket that hung heavily over his lean frame. A black beanie was pulled low over a forehead lined with scars, the most prominent running jagged from his left temple to just above his cheekbone. A souvenir from an IED blast in Afghanistan that had taken his legs and a slice of his soul 7 years earlier. Years of rehab hadn't restored full control of his body, but he'd learned to navigate pain with stoic grace and quiet resistance. His face, usually impassive, was alert today, not with excitement, but with unease. Behind him walked Vanessa Lawson, pushing the chair. Mid-30s, statuesque, pale-skinned, her jet-black hair was pulled into a tight bun, revealing the sharp angle of her jawline. She moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every gesture, every smile. Her beauty was undeniable, but cold, like polished marble. Once a high-end real estate agent in Sydney's eastern suburbs, Vanessa had met Jack at an RSL fundraiser 2 years ago. The spark was brief, the wedding quicker. Since then, her warmth had retreated like frost under the summer sun, and Jack began to suspect she'd fallen in love not with the man, but with his veteran's pension and the sprawling mountain property left to him by his grandfather. Vanessa's grip on the wheelchair handles tightened as they neared a section of the track where the trees fell away, revealing a sheer drop. "Almost there," she said, her tone flat. Jack squinted ahead. "You sure this is safe? These tracks get narrow near the edge." "It's fine," she cut in. "You always wanted to see the sunrise from Widow's Ledge. Consider it your anniversary gift." Jack let the silence settle. Something about her tone. It wasn't cruel, but it was empty. Like she wasn't really there. Back at the house, tied to a short lead on the veranda post, was Ghost. A 6-year-old German shepherd, broad-shouldered and lean, with a deep sable coat flecked in ash gray and rust. His amber eyes mirrored every flicker of Jack's emotions. Ghost had once sniffed out explosives in hostile territory. Now, under Vanessa's rules, he wasn't even allowed inside. No dogs in the kitchen. No dogs on the couch. No dogs upstairs. She'd drawn the line everywhere. But Ghost remembered, and he disobeyed in silence. That morning, as soon as Vanessa wheeled Jack out of the yard, Ghost began to whimper. The moment she was out of sight, he yanked hard. The old rope creaked once, then snapped. Ghost tore through the orchard like a shadow, nose low, paws silent on dew-soaked grass, cutting through tracks he knew by instinct. Up ahead, Jack's chair jolted slightly as the gravel thinned. The drop beside them loomed sharp and sudden, the gum canopy falling away into a yawning void of mist and sandstone. Jack gripped the armrests. "Vanessa, this is close enough." She didn't stop. Her eyes stayed locked on the horizon, where the sun now crowned the ridge in defiant gold. "Just a few more feet." "Vanessa, you know what's funny?" she said, and for the first time that morning, she smiled. But it was the kind of smile that chilled bone. This was never supposed to be a life sentence. The marriage, the chair, the dog, the pity. She exhaled slowly. "I gave it a shot, Jack. I really did." Jack felt the tremor in her voice, but it wasn't sadness. It was something darker. He turned in the chair, trying to see her face, but she leaned forward suddenly and grabbed both armrests. Ghost burst through the tree line. He was 10 meters away when he saw them. His human perched on the edge of oblivion. And Vanessa, shoulders tense, hands white-knuckled. He barked once, loud, sharp, desperate. Vanessa hesitated, but only for a second. Her hands released the brake. Jack's chair lurched. "No!" he shouted. The gravel beneath the front wheels crumbled. Jack's body pitched forward, weightless. Ghost lunged, claws tearing at the earth as he sprinted. But he was too far, too late. There was no scream, just the metallic echo of wheels spinning into nothing, and the whisper of wind against flesh. Vanessa straightened, wiped her palms on her leggings, and turned. Ghost skidded to a halt, nails scraping rock. He ran to the edge and growled, barking into the void. His ears pinned back, eyes wild. Vanessa glanced over her shoulder, startled. Their eyes met, and for a brief flickering second, Ghost's body trembled. Not with fear, with rage. Vanessa turned quickly, almost slipping as she hurried down the track. She didn't look back. The path home was familiar. So was her next move. Call the local DVA clinic. Say Jack had an episode and left early for treatment in Sydney. No one would question her. Not with her voice so calm, her face so composed, her story rehearsed. Behind her, hidden by gums and low cloud, Ghost stayed at the cliff's edge, barking into the sky as the wind began to howl. The sky over the blue mountains had started to shift, darkening at the edges like a spreading bruise. The wind picked up, teasing gum leaves into whispering secrets. Morning light filtered through the clouds, painting the escarpments in muted silver. The birds had fallen silent. Something in the air felt off balance, as though the bush itself had sensed betrayal. Below the precipice at Widow's Ledge, Jack Lawson lay crumpled against a jagged sandstone outcrop. His wheelchair had miraculously wedged between two rocky spurs. The fall had bruised his ribs and torn open an old scar on his shoulder. Blood matted his jacket sleeve, and his lips had turned pale with shock. But he was breathing, still alive, still tethered to the world by threads of pain and defiance. He couldn't feel his legs. He never could. But now, worse, he could barely move his torso. His back ached from the violent jolt of the halted fall. Breathing came in short, shallow gasps. A gull cried overhead. The scent of dirt and iron hung thick in the air. "Ghost," he croaked, voice thin, barely above the rustle of wind through the canyon gums. "Ghost." Above him, the German shepherd paced the cliff's edge, tail high, ears twitching, eyes locked on the drop. Ghost barked once, twice, then turned and bolted back the way they'd come. The property wasn't far, less than a kilometer through a narrow switchback that twisted past the old orchard and down into the lower paddocks. Ghost tore through it like a shadow, leaping fallen logs, ignoring the blackberry thorns that scratched his flanks. Gravel crunched under his paws. His breath came heavy, but his focus never wavered. Inside the modest weatherboard homestead that sat beside the orchard, Sam Carter had just poured his second mug of long black. He stood barefoot in the open doorway, tall and wiry in a worn gray Henley and faded jeans. His hair was cropped short, prematurely silver at the temples, and his hands, strong and calloused, bore the history of both war and farm work. Sam had been Jack's section leader back in Afghanistan, and later, after discharge, became caretaker of the Lawson place. Loyalty came easy to him, until Vanessa moved in. From the start, Sam hadn't trusted her. She was all diamonds and detachment, polite to everyone but never warm, her smile more rehearsed than real. Jack deserved more than someone who spoke to him like he was an obligation. Still, Sam had kept his opinions to himself. That morning, he'd seen Vanessa return alone, dust on her leggings and a far-off look in her eyes. When he'd asked where Jack was, she muttered something about early rehab and vanished inside. Now he heard frantic barking. Ghost barreled across the gravel and skidded to a stop at Sam's feet, tongue lolling, chest heaving with urgency. Without hesitation, Ghost bit at Sam's sleeve and tugged hard. "What the hell, boy?" Sam dropped his mug, the ceramic shattering on the veranda. "Ghost? What's going on?" Ghost growled and pulled again, more insistent this time. His amber eyes, almost human, held something Sam couldn't ignore. Desperation. Sam stepped down into the grass, letting the dog lead. Ghost took off, glancing back constantly to make sure Sam was following. Sam grabbed a torch and a first aid kit from the wall, laced up his boots in seconds, and jogged after him. His gut twisted. Something was wrong. He felt it before he saw anything. The track narrowed as they climbed. Ghost veered left past a row of old mountain ash, leading him into the clearing at Widow's Ledge. Sam stopped dead as the horizon opened before him. His breath caught. The earth near the cliff was disturbed. 2 parallel grooves were etched into the loose dirt, wheelchair tracks. They ran straight toward the edge. "Oh God," he whispered. Ghost whined low, then barked again. Loud, sharp. Sam crept forward, heart pounding. He dropped to his knees and peered over the lip of the cliff. For a moment, there was nothing but rock and air. Then, just below, a flicker of movement, a glint of metal. A figure. "Jack," he shouted, voice cracking. A pause. Then, faint as the breeze. "Sam." Sam's eyes widened. "Jesus, you're alive. I can't move." Jack's voice was ragged. "Chair's stuck. I don't know how long." "I've got you," Sam said, already pulling his phone from his pocket. No signal. Of course not. This ridge had always been a dead zone. He shoved the phone back in and looked at Ghost. "Stay watching." Ghost stepped to the edge, lay down, and peered below, letting out a long, mournful whine. Sam scanned the terrain. He couldn't climb down safely without gear. Not yet. But he could run to the shed. There was an old coil of climbing rope, some harnesses left over from their training days, if they were still intact. He turned and sprinted. Ghost stayed put, body tense, eyes never leaving Jack, as if his presence alone could hold his mate in place. By the time Sam reached the shed, the sky had shifted from pale gray to the color of bruised steel. Clouds gathered fast over the ranges, swirling like a slow, inevitable reckoning. The scent of ozone filled the air. Thick, sharp. The shed sat on the western edge of the Lawson property, an old timber structure with a sagging roof and peeling red paint, but solid where it mattered. Inside, dust swirled in the shafts of light spilling through gaps in the boards. Sam moved fast. He climbed over an overturned wheelbarrow and headed for a locked supply cabinet at the back wall. He hadn't opened it in years. When Jack first came home after the blast, they'd trained together again, just to feel movement, to feel normal. Some of the old gear had been left behind. Sam reached for the padlock, fingers trembling, then drove his boot into the latch. It snapped. Inside, coiled beneath a tarp, lay a harness, a belay device, and a length of climbing rope, frayed in places, but still strong enough to save a life. He grabbed everything he needed. The air felt heavier around him as the wind outside picked up. Gum leaves swirled across the yard, whispering secrets he didn't want to hear. Sam Carter threw the rescue gear into the back of his ute and tore out of the gravel drive, tires spitting dust as the first drops of rain splattered the windscreen. Back at the Lawson property, Vanessa Lawson stood before a wide bathroom mirror, applying mascara with calculated precision. Her reflection was flawless. Dark eyes, clean lines, crimson lips, not a trace of worry. She had already made the call to Jack's physiotherapist in Sydney, claiming her husband had been transferred early that morning for a last-minute extended treatment plan. Her voice had been calm, even concerned. She played her role with grace. She'd changed into a charcoal pencil skirt and a cream blouse that hugged her figure, her black heels clicking softly across the polished timber floor. There was no panic in her step. The wheelchair's travel cover was already folded and placed neatly back in the garage. Now she was on her way to the office of Thad Jennings, a probate lawyer in the Katoomba town center. Vanessa had worked with Thad once before when helping a client purchase a heritage property. He was in his late 50s, always wore a vest regardless of the weather, and spoke with the slow confidence of a man who'd seen every trick in the book. When Vanessa arrived, the rain was falling steadily. She walked under a black umbrella, designer handbag swinging at her side. The building was a small brick Federation-style office nestled between a bakery and a barber shop. She entered, heels tapping lightly on the polished hardwood. "Mrs. Lawson," Thad said, looking up from behind his oak desk, raising a gray brow. "Didn't expect to see you today. Everything all right?" She smiled politely. "Of course. I just wanted to go over Jack's trust again. We discussed making some adjustments in case, circumstances changed." Thad closed his ledger and folded his hands. "You mean if he passes?" She gave a tight nod. "Or is declared missing? I've been told such clauses can be triggered without a death certificate, given time." Thad's gaze sharpened. "Forgive me, but isn't Jack due for a checkup today? I thought he had another 6 months of rehab left." He was moved this morning to Sydney for specialized care. She replied quickly. There was a change in his treatment plan. I didn't have time to notify everyone. And he authorized that? Thad asked, voice neutral but probing. He's been struggling, she said with a subtle tremble. Mentally, he needed a break. Thad leaned back slowly. You'll need medical records. Vanessa, signed forms, witness transfers. If we're going to act on any clause in the trust, especially anything involving disbursement, we'll need more than your word. She smiled again, cooler this time. Of course, I'm working on getting everything sent over. I just wanted to be proactive. Thad didn't return the smile. He watched her leave, eyes narrowing slightly as the door clicked shut behind her. Back on the escarpment track, Sam pulled his ute onto the verge and jogged the last stretch toward Widow's Ledge. The rain had thickened to a misting sheet, and thunder grumbled in the distance. Ghost was still at the cliff's edge, tail curled, soaked to the bone, but unmoving. He rose to meet Sam with a short bark, then returned to his perch, eyes locked on the drop. Good boy, Sam muttered, laying the gear out in the grass. His hands moved quickly, clipping carabiners, checking knots. The rope was old, but he doubled it up. He wasn't about to gamble with Jack's life. He slipped into the harness, gritting his teeth against the cold rain soaking his collar and sleeves. The rock was slick, the dirt soft and muddy. He looped the belay around a thick gum trunk and tested the tension. It held. Hold the line, Ghost, he whispered as he backed toward the edge. He descended slowly, boots finding shallow toeholds as he abseiled down. Each meter felt like a mile. Water streamed down the cliff face in thin rivulets, making the stone feel alive and shivering. Lightning forked across the sky behind him, illuminating the gray world in sharp relief. When he reached the outcrop, he saw Jack slumped against a boulder, lips cracked, skin pale. Jack's eyes fluttered open as Sam dropped beside him. Back already? Jack rasped. Shut up, Sam said, kneeling to check his pulse. You're bloody lucky you're not dead. Hold still. Above them, Ghost barked again, a sharp, proud cry. Sam pulled a thermal blanket from his belt pouch and tucked it around Jack. He clicked his radio. Static, no signal. You're going to be fine, he muttered. I've got you. The rain intensified, sheets of water hammering the rocks. Sam tightened the straps around Jack and clipped the second rope to his harness. This'll be the worst elevator ride of your life, mate. He looked up into the blur of gray above. Ghost's silhouette waited, unwavering, the only clear shape against the storm. Rain ran in rivulets down Sam's brow as he crouched beside Jack on the narrow ledge, the wind whipping at them with brutal insistence. The storm was in full voice now, roaring against the side of the range like some ancient fury. Jack lay crumpled on his side, wrapped in the thermal blanket, face pale, lips tinged blue. Every breath was shallow, rasping, but his eyes, though dulled, still held defiance. Sam's fingers worked quickly. Years of training and tactical extractions came rushing back as muscle memory. He clipped carabiners to the harness around Jack's torso and thighs, reinforced the knots, and checked the tension line twice. Can you move your arms? He asked without looking up. Left one, Jack muttered. Right's dead weight right now. That's enough. Just keep that brain ticking over. All right, you pass out on me, and I'll make you climb back up yourself. A weak laugh escaped Jack Lawson, followed by a cough that rattled in his chest. Above them, Ghost's silhouette appeared in jagged flashes of lightning. The German shepherd paced along the cliff's edge, barking sharp, guttural encouragements. Rain soaked through his coat, but he stood firm, paws braced in the mud, eyes locked on the rescue below. He didn't whine, he didn't panic. He knew the drill. Ghost had been trained for high-stress operations. 6 years old, but carrying himself like a seasoned veteran. Broad chest, intelligent eyes, dark sable fur bristling with resolve. Sam Carter gave a final tug on the harness. All right, mate, time to get you out of hell again. Using the pulley system he'd hastily rigged from spare climbing rope, Sam braced himself against a rocky outcrop and began a slow ascent, hauling Jack inch by agonizing inch. The injured man groaned with every jolt, teeth clenched against the pain. Mud sloshed around Sam's boots, the weight of the climb dragging against his spine. Halfway up, the wind shifted. A bolt of lightning split the sky overhead, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the mountainside. A small landslide of wet pebbles cascaded past Sam's shoulder, missing him by inches. He paused, bracing them both against the wall, breath catching. Still with me? Barely, Jack whispered. Sam grunted and kept climbing. Meanwhile, across the property, deep inside the main homestead, Maria Alvarez stood alone in the hallway, her hand hovering over the kitchen rubbish bin. In her 60s, short and round, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose braid. Her olive-toned skin had weathered over the years, but her brown eyes were still sharp, always catching what others missed. She'd worked at the Lawson place for more than a decade, long before Vanessa arrived. It was Vanessa's absence that morning that raised her suspicion. Too quiet, no breakfast orders, no music from her room. Then she noticed the rubbish, torn paper, smudged ink. Maria didn't pry often, but something about the mess of shredded pages made her pause. She lifted a scrap from the top, unfolding it carefully. A printed letterhead from St. Agnes Rehabilitation Center. Her eyes widened. It was a treatment plan, but dated yesterday. And the signature line, scrawled hastily, read Dr. S. Carrion. Maria's brows knitted. She'd seen Dr. Carrion's real signature on official correspondence before. This one was wrong, too rushed, slanted differently. Frowning, she gathered the remaining scraps and slipped them into a freezer bag. She grabbed her raincoat from the back door and stepped outside, mind racing. Her niece Teresa worked part-time at the Katoomba Council offices, a sharp young woman who once mentioned how forgery checks were processed. If anyone could verify this without raising alarms, it was her. Thunder rolled across the property as Maria climbed into her aging Toyota Corolla and turned the ignition. Back at the cliff, Sam's fingers ached from the strain. Jack's weight dragged hard against the line, and the rain showed no mercy. At last, Sam's gloved hands reached the final anchor. With one last surge, he pulled Jack fully onto the plateau. Ghost rushed in immediately, circling them, whining softly, then licking Jack's face in short, urgent strokes. "Good boy," Jack muttered. Sam collapsed beside them, chest heaving. He pulled a second thermal blanket from his pack and wrapped it around Jack. "We're not out yet. We've got to get you to the ute." He glanced at Ghost. "Stay close. Watch the rear." The dog fell in behind without hesitation. Sam wrapped his arms under Jack's torso and, grunting with effort, lifted him into a fireman's carry. Jack winced and groaned but didn't protest. Ghost moved beside them, ears alert, scanning the bush. The track back would be treacherous. Mud, roots, lightning. But Sam didn't hesitate. He'd carried Jack through worse. They disappeared into the mist and rain. Three shadows moving together toward the faint promise of light beyond the trees. The emergency department at Nepean Hospital glowed under sterile white lights, humming with quiet urgency. Nurses in navy scrubs moved like whispers across the linoleum floors, faces composed, voices calm. The storm outside had passed, but the scent of wet eucalyptus still clung to those who'd walked in from it. Jack Lawson was wheeled in by Sam, his unconscious body limp beneath layers of soaked thermal blankets. Blood stained the corner of his jacket, his face a pale canvas of exhaustion and trauma. Sam limped behind the stretcher, boots muddy, shirt plastered to his chest. He didn't say much, just barked. Army vet, spinal injury, possible hypothermia, head trauma, before stepping aside to let the staff swarm. Ghost followed close, wet fur matted, ears pinned back, eyes burning with silent desperation. The security guard at the entrance started to block the dog, but Sam stepped between them. "He stays," Sam growled. "He's not a pet. That dog's half the reason the man's still breathing." Reluctantly, the nurse on duty nodded. Ghost settled beside the stretcher, dripping water across the polished floor, gaze never leaving Jack. Down the hall, Vanessa Lawson stood in a marbled waiting area, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her white blouse was pristine, tucked neatly into slacks that hadn't seen dirt in weeks. Her dark hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, heels clicking lightly against the tile as she paced. She had arrived only moments earlier, feigning shock after receiving a call from a hospital staffer saying her husband had been found injured near their property. She'd driven in silence, rehearsing grief. The door opened, and a police officer stepped in, Detective Janelle Hart. Early 40s, tall and angular, deep brown skin, short curly hair tucked under NSW police cap. Detective Janelle Hart was a veteran of the NSW police force, known for her restraint and razor-sharp perception. She approached Vanessa Lawson slowly, taking in the woman's posture, the measured smoothness of her voice. "I understand your husband was scheduled to begin treatment in Sydney," Hart said evenly. Vanessa blinked. Yes, he left yesterday morning. I didn't expect to hear from anyone until today. And you didn't accompany him? He insisted on going alone, Vanessa replied, her tone calm but just a shade too smooth. He needed space. He's been distant lately. Hart scribbled a note in her pad. And you didn't think to call the center when he didn't check in? Vanessa hesitated. I assumed he arrived. Hart nodded slowly, her eyes searching. In the emergency department, Ghost suddenly growled. The shepherd's entire body went rigid as Vanessa stepped into the trauma bay. His fur bristled, lips peeling back over his teeth. A low, guttural sound echoed off the white walls. The nurses froze. Ghost stepped between Vanessa and Jack's hospital bed, tail stiff, muscles tight, eyes narrowed. Call him off, Vanessa snapped, stepping back. From the corner, Sam Carter raised a brow. That's not how he works. He's trained to detect threats. The lead nurse glanced from the dog to Jack, then back. This is a medical zone. If the animal's reacting like that, there's probably a reason. Ghost lunged. Not to attack, but to plant himself directly beside Jack. His body arched protectively. His eyes never left Vanessa. Hart entered then, catching the tail end of the scene. She watched the dog for a long beat, then turned to Vanessa. Looks like someone's got a sense about you. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a breath. Elsewhere, under the dripping gum canopy, still soaked from the storm, Senior Constable Cole Renner examined the track leading toward Widow's Ledge. Late 30s, stocky build, weathered face under a sweat-stained tan cap. His uniform was damp from the drizzle that hadn't quite let go. He knelt at the cliff's edge, torch beam grazing over two parallel grooves. Distinct, clean, unmistakable. Wheelchair tracks. The soil was disturbed. The grooves didn't veer or turn. They ended at the edge. Renner's partner, a younger constable named Diaz, approached. You think he fell? Renner shook his head. Doesn't look like a fall. Looks like he was pushed. Want me to report it in? Renner stood slowly, wiping dirt from his glove. Not yet. Let's keep it close until we know what the boss wants. Back at the hospital, Vanessa sat stiffly in the waiting room, the storm of the dog's reaction still replaying in her head. Her fingers tapped nervously on her knee, heel bouncing against the floor. She hadn't slept well in days. Ever since the morning she'd returned from the cliff, she'd started seeing Ghost in her dreams, watching her. Sometimes barking, sometimes growling, sometimes silent and still as a statue, but always accusing. Now, even when she closed her eyes in daylight, his gaze followed her. In the trauma bay, Jack stirred. His eyelids fluttered open under the harsh fluorescent lights. A heart monitor beeped softly beside him. He blinked slowly, dry lips parting. Ghost whined softly, placing a paw gently on the side of the bed. Sam leaned closer. Jack, you with me? Jack's voice was barely audible. Ghost, I'm here, Sam said quickly. We got you out. Jack's brow furrowed. She pushed me. Sam's jaw clenched. We figured. A quiet shuffle behind the curtain, and Detective Hart stepped in. She stood silently at first, letting the words hang, then retrieved her notepad. Jack turned his head slowly, weak but focused. It wasn't an accident. I didn't fall. Who did it? Hart asked, her tone soft but firm. Jack's eyes closed briefly, then opened. Vanessa. Ghost let out a low growl, as if confirming the name. Hart wrote without expression. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Outside, lightning had faded to memory, but the wind still whispered through the eaves like a warning. Katoomba's dawn rose behind a veil of low-hanging mist, pale light seeping into the gum-covered hills like a secret trying to surface. The hospital sat quiet but tense, a hum of restrained activity beneath the fluorescent lights. In room 214, Jack Lawson lay propped up slightly by pillows, a faint blush of color returning to his cheeks. His bandaged head bore the angry mark of a gash just above the brow, and a monitor beeped steadily beside him. At his feet, Ghost lay curled with one ear perked, half asleep but never fully resting. Jack stared out the window, his thoughts far from the room, returning again and again to the moment Vanessa's hands left the back of his chair. The raw betrayal, the absence of hesitation, the cold. Sam entered quietly, holding 2 coffees, dressed in a gray zip-up and jeans. His broad shoulders were tense despite the casual clothes. His salt and pepper hair was still damp from an early walk with Ghost. Still no sleep? Sam asked, handing him a cup. Jack gave a half smile. Hard to sleep when your last nap almost became permanent. Sam chuckled darkly. That's one way to put it. Moments later, the door creaked again. Maria Alvarez, the longtime housekeeper at the Lawson property, stepped in cautiously. Late 50s, small and wiry, olive-toned skin, long gray-black hair tied in a tight braid. Years of labor and silence had built a quiet strength in her. Her dark, sharp eyes darted between Jack and Sam. "Senor Jack," she said softly, "I have something you need to see." She held out a plain manila envelope. Inside were several printed pages, doctored medical documents Jack didn't recognize, but bearing his forged signature. And more damning still, a printed transcript of a voicemail Maria had secretly recorded just days earlier. "She left this on my phone by accident. Or maybe she thought I couldn't understand her," Maria said. "But I did. Every word." Sam scanned the sheet, his eyes widening. "When he dies, I'll be the one to sign the documents." "Jesus," Maria nodded. She said it like it was done, like she'd already buried you. Outside, Detective Hart leaned against her police cruiser near the hospital's emergency exit, the weight of the case settling in like the damp mountain air. Her coat collar was turned up against the cold, fingers drumming softly against her notepad. Detective Janelle Hart had already received word from Senior Constable Renner about the track evidence. And now, with Maria's envelope in hand, she had what she needed. That night, at exactly 9:42 p.m., a highway patrol cruiser rolled up the long gravel driveway of the Lawson property in the Blue Mountains. Vanessa Lawson was in the study, sipping white wine in a navy silk robe, scrolling through her phone as if nothing in her world had come undone. She barely looked up when the knock came. "Officers," she said, standing tall, chin tilted, voice a purr. "If this is about Jack, I already told." Hart stepped forward. "Vanessa Lawson, you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and falsification of legal documents." Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me." Her voice stayed composed, but a tremor tugged at the corners of her mouth. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof." Hart handed her the printed voicemail transcript and the forged medical plans. "These say otherwise." Maria stood just behind the officer line, arms folded. Vanessa's eyes met hers. No hatred, just disbelief at being outplayed. The handcuffs clicked shut around Vanessa's wrists. Her smirk faded. "You can't do this. I haven't done anything." "You did plenty," Hart replied. They walked her out into the cold mountain night, past the statue's still gums, the wind whistling like judgment. No reporters. No neighbors, just the silence of justice being carried out. Meanwhile, at the Australian Veterans Recovery Centre in Sydney, Jack Lawson was transferred to a private recovery suite reserved for high-profile injuries. The centre was clean and warm, decorated with Australian flags and handwritten notes from schoolkids pinned to corkboards. His lead therapist, Dr. Tamara Connors, a woman in her early 40s with russet curls tucked into a loose bun, was known for being both stern and intuitive. She studied Jack's chart, trauma, spinal damage, but stable. "You're lucky." "I don't feel lucky," Jack muttered. "You should," she said. "That dog saved your life." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of her voice. She leaned down and scratched behind his ears. "Official policy says no animals in recovery," she said simply, "but he stays." From the corner, Sam Carter gave a small nod. "He's not just a dog. He's the whole bloody story." By morning, local news outlets had already caught wind of what happened. The Sydney Morning Herald headline read, "Veteran thrown off cliff survives thanks to loyal dog." The story spread faster than a bushfire in summer. Within hours, national blogs picked it up. Hashtags trended. Hashtag goes the hero, hashtag justice for Jack, #K9 Sevestiger. The betrayal was shocking, but what gripped people was Ghost, the war dog turned companion who refused to let go. Veteran support groups reposted the article. Former ADF soldiers sent letters to the hospital. Even a retired general wrote to commend Jack's resilience. One young nurse, Haley Prescott, brought in a neatly folded Australian flag and set it on the windowsill beside Jack's bed. "For him," she said, nodding toward Ghost. "Because he served, too." Jack looked at her, emotion swelling behind tired eyes. "Thank you." Ghost nuzzled the flag gently with his nose. A pale light filtered through the windows of the Downing Centre Courthouse in Sydney, glinting off polished wood and casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Rain had started falling again that morning, brushing the steps like a quiet reckoning. Inside courtroom 4B, the gallery was packed. Reporters, veterans, locals. Some in uniform, some with service dogs of their own. They came not just to witness justice, but to honor something deeper. Resilience. loyalty, truth. Jack Lawson sat near the front in his wheelchair, dressed in a dark navy suit that hung a little loose on his once broader frame. He looked pale, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room with calm precision. Ghost sat at his side, posture rigid, brown-black fur freshly brushed, service vest snug around his muscular frame. His ears twitched at every shuffle, but his gaze stayed locked on the defense table. Vanessa Lawson sat there with her arms folded tightly across her chest. No silk robe, no wine glass, just a standard charcoal gray pantsuit. Her golden hair was pulled back in a sharp ponytail. Her makeup was flawless, but fatigue showed in her eyes. She looked thinner, as if the weight of her own secrets had been eating her alive. Presiding was the Honorable Martha Redcliffe, a firm but fair judge in her late 60s. Tall, commanding, silver hair in a tight bun. She was known across New South Wales for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for theatrics. She peered over her spectacles and nodded toward the prosecutor. "You may call your witness." Jack wheeled forward with Sam at his side. Sam leaned in and whispered, "You got this, mate," before taking a seat behind him. Jack adjusted the mic. "My name is Jack Lawson. I served in the Australian Army until I was injured in Afghanistan. After returning home, I married Vanessa, and I thought we had a life." He paused, voice steady but carrying a quiet ache. "On the morning of March 5th, Vanessa offered to take me on a walk for our anniversary. We went to Windfall Bluff, a place I loved. As we got near the edge, I noticed her demeanor had changed, cold, distant. In the gallery, people leaned in. Ghost raised his head. She wheeled me to the edge. I remember her hands on the back of the chair. Then, she let go. The courtroom went utterly still. I fell, but not far. The wheelchair lodged between rocks. I was alive, trapped. Ghost had followed us. He saw everything. He barked until someone came." The prosecutor nodded. "Do you recognize that someone in this courtroom?" "Yes," Jack said, gesturing. "Sam Carter, my friend. He and Ghost saved my life." Sam was called next, standing tall in a black shirt tucked into worn jeans, ready to tell his part of the story. Sam Carter spoke with the conviction of a man who'd lived through things he never thought he'd speak of in public. "I found him down there. I heard his voice. If Ghost hadn't come for me, I never would have gone up that track." Maria Alvarez was next. She stepped into the witness box in a dark green blouse and long skirt, her silver braid tucked neatly beneath a wool scarf. She carried herself with grace, but there was an unmistakable air of deep personal betrayal in her eyes. "I worked for the Lawson family for 8 years. I trusted Mrs. Vanessa, but I found documents in the rubbish, faked medical letters with forged signatures. Then I heard her voicemail. I gave those to the authorities. I couldn't stay silent. Lastly, Dr. Tamara Connors gave her testimony. A crisp, clinical report of Jack Lawson's medical state and a professional confirmation that the fall was deliberate, based on his injuries and witness accounts. When the defense called Vanessa Lawson, she was reluctant, fidgeting with her cuffs before finally taking the stand. Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to. I was overwhelmed. He was always broken, always needing care. I thought maybe the insurance could help him get better treatment." The room tensed. Judge Martha Redcliffe tilted her head, unimpressed. "Or perhaps you thought he died and you'd collect the money." Vanessa blinked rapidly, lips trembling. "I loved him once." The silence that followed was damning. Then something unexpected happened. Judge Redcliffe called for a brief recess, but before anyone moved, she looked at Ghost. "I understand the dog has become central to this case," she said, removing her glasses. "Not just emotionally, but practically. I've reviewed the paperwork submitted by Dr. Connors and the Veterans Center." She turned toward Jack. "Mr. Lawson, I hereby declare your service dog, Ghost, an official emotional support animal under state law. He may accompany you to any public or private space necessary." A ripple of quiet applause spread through the courtroom. Jack leaned down and patted Ghost gently. The dog pressed his head into Jack's chest and let out a soft huff. The final verdict came an hour later. Judge Redcliffe's voice was unwavering. "Vanessa Lawson, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum term allowable under New South Wales law for attempted murder, fraud, and criminal falsification. May justice serve as a mirror to your actions." Vanessa didn't scream. She didn't protest. She simply stood, knees trembling, and allowed herself to be handcuffed. For the first time, a tear slipped down her cheek, but it came far too late. Outside, the crowd waited. As Jack was wheeled out of the courthouse with Ghost at his side, people rose to their feet in applause. A few saluted. Some clapped. Others simply whispered, "That's the dog," and nodded with deep respect. Jack looked out over the crowd. He didn't smile. Instead, he closed his eyes, reached down, and wrapped both arms around Ghost's neck. The dog stood perfectly still, eyes closed, leaning into the man he had never stopped protecting. The wind in the Blue Mountains had softened. The late spring sun painted the sky in shades of peach and rose as it dipped behind the ridgelines. A dirt road led up to a modest timber cabin perched above a field of wildflowers, the kind of home built not with wealth, but with love, patience, and calloused hands. No gates, no high walls, just a simple veranda, a ramp leading to the door, and the steady sound of wind chimes clinking like distant laughter. Jack Lawson sat on the veranda in his wheelchair, wrapped in a flannel blanket, a mug of lukewarm coffee resting in his hand. His hair had grown a bit longer, and the beard he once kept shaved was now full and silvering at the chin. The deep lines on his face told of both pain and survival. But his eyes, sharp, bright, unshaken, reflected a man who had walked through fire and found his way back. Beside him, Ghost lay with his head resting gently on Jack's thigh. The shepherd's coat glistened in the evening light, healed from old scratches and scars, muscles taut beneath the fur. He was no longer confined to the cold veranda of the old house. Now he had a large kennel right beside Jack's bedroom window, where he slept, but rarely stayed. His place was next to Jack, always. The cabin had been a gift. After Vanessa's conviction, word of the trial spread far beyond the mountains. Donations poured in from veterans groups, local tradies, and even strangers across the state. Sam Carter took charge of the build, refusing payment. He showed up every morning in worn boots and a tool belt, hammering and sawing alongside anyone who came to help. Now Sam came by most evenings, always with a six-pack and a story. On this particular day, he was late. Jack didn't mind. He enjoyed the quiet, the way the veranda creaked under the weight of memory and renewal, the chirps of birds in the distance, and the constant presence of Ghost. Inside the house, on the living room wall, hung a small frame, a photograph of Jack in uniform, arms around his army mates, Ghost, still a young pup in training, by his side. Below it was another photo taken just last week, Jack holding a boy in his arms while Ghost sat close, tongue hanging, ears perked. The boy's name was Carter, 7 years old, living with cerebral palsy, and wearing an impossibly bright smile. He was part of a local therapy group for children of veterans. His mother, Alicia, was a single mom who worked at the town library. Mid-30s, petite, with curly chestnut hair always pulled into a bun and reading glasses that never seemed to stay put on her nose. Quiet and observant, Alicia had first brought Carter to the group reluctantly, unsure how he'd fit in. But the moment Carter saw Ghost, something shifted. The boy reached out, wobbly, uncertain, and Ghost, as if understanding everything, walked gently up and nuzzled his hand. From that day on, Carter called Ghost his guardian ranger. Jack had taken a liking to Carter quickly. At first, he wasn't sure how to talk to kids, especially one with medical needs. But Carter's unfiltered questions and laughter melted those doubts. They played simple games in the garden. Ghost let young Carter toss sticks, though he rarely chased them. Instead, he'd nudge them back gently so the boy could try again. "Carter's going to be the next little warrior," Jack Lawson had said during one of the therapy sessions. "He's braver than I ever was." The Veterans Therapy Group had welcomed Jack and Ghost with open arms. Dr. Margot Lennox, a trauma specialist in her early 50s with kind eyes and a fondness for floral scarves, invited them each week to share stories with other former ADF members living with PTSD. Ghost had become something of a legend in those circles. Calming, attentive, and attuned to invisible wounds. Many called him the four-legged therapist. Not long ago, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Joseph, always withdrawn, always standing apart, had burst into tears after Ghost quietly sat beside him without being called. "I haven't let anyone touch me in 20 years, he whispered, scratching behind Ghost's ear. Back on the veranda, the golden light was fading. Jack took a deep, full breath. It doesn't hurt to breathe anymore. Not like it used to. He reached down and scratched Ghost behind the neck. "You knew before I did that something was wrong," he murmured. "You always did." Ghost's ears flicked in acknowledgement. A moment later, The front gate creaked and Sam Carter came up the path carrying 2 bags of groceries and a worn leather journal under his arm. "You're late," Jack said with a grin. "I was collecting more fan mail," Sam replied, tossing the journal into Jack's lap. A dozen more letters from high school kids who read the story. One of them wants to write a report on Ghost for class. Jack chuckled. He'd better get my name right, too. As the 2 men laughed, the sky deepened. Stars began to appear like pinpricks in velvet. Ghost shifted, laying his full weight against Jack's feet. Sam stood, looking out over the hills. "Crazy how things change. A year ago, I thought I'd be burying you." "You almost did," Jack said softly. "But you didn't." Silence fell between them again, this time a comfortable one. After Sam went inside to make dinner, Jack stayed. Ghost didn't move. Together, they watched the last blush of daylight slip behind the ranges. Jack spoke aloud, not to Sam, not to the world, but to something larger, deeper. "I lost everything. My legs, my marriage, my pride. But God, you gave me this. You gave me a friend who never left, and a reason to live again." Ghost tilted his head slightly, pressing his nose against Jack's arm. "And you," Jack whispered, "you're more than a dog. You're a miracle. Sometimes God doesn't stop the storm. He walks with us through it." Jack had lost everything the world values. Strength, pride, even the ability to walk. But what he gained was far more powerful. A loyal friend, a renewed purpose, and a second chance at life. That is the quiet miracle so many of us overlook. Ghost wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that when others abandon us, God often sends help in the most unexpected forms. Maybe it's a mate, maybe it's a stranger, maybe it's a dog. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, or simply type "Amen" to stand with Jack and Ghost in prayer. May God bless you and guide you through your own journey. Type "Amen" if you believe in second chances.